Good afternoon to you. I'm Nino Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for August 3rd, 2026. Today, we're going to talk about what to expect across the tropics in the Atlantic as we begin the month of August. We are 3 days in, but we are still at the very beginning of the month, so I guess you could say that we are just starting in, and we are just, still getting into the groove of things and settling down with the month of August. So we're going to take a look at what the Atlantic might have in store. And I've already been hinting at a few things over the last few days, in terms of model signals, potential activity in certain spots, and we'll also review it today. But in general, we'll just take a look at how the tropics are doing right now. And starting off with the National Hurricane Center Tropical Weather Bulletin, still not much out there to talk about. The, bearer of all things tropical, the well of knowledge and everything that we need to know when it comes to the tropics. It all starts right here with the National Hurricane Center. And at the end of the day, even if there are model signals out there and, some hints of certain areas that we might have to keep in mind of 7 to 10 days or beyond 10 days into the long range, if the National Hurricane Center is still not talking about it, I guess it is not quite an immediate concern just yet. So if that is your baseline of, is there anything I need to be concerned about right now in the tropics, according to the National Hurricane Center, at least in the Atlantic Basin for now, but we know it can change, and we know how, especially as we get closer and closer towards the peak of the hurricane season, things can flip on a dime. But for now, everything is nice and quiet. But I'll show you, again, as we progress later into the month, at least over the next 2 or so weeks, maybe we will see some signs of life, and I've hinted at it before, but again, we will go over it once again in today's video. The Pacific, though, also nothing expected over the next 7 days. Genevieve died off after becoming a Category 5 hurricane last week. A pretty good run for a storm, I must say, to be able to reach Category 5 intensity, and definitely took advantage of its favorable conditions. But now, nothing expected in the Pacific as well. So at least in the Western Hemisphere, the tropics are nice and quiet. The main area that is there to track is in the Western Pacific, with Typhoon Dolphin, which is obviously aiming at China and potentially Japan as well, and it is going to potentially impact a large population center, as China and Asia generally is, but at least across the Western Hemisphere basins, nothing much happening, according to the National Hurricane Center, just yet. Here's a look at the tropics across the Atlantic Basin right now, satellite imagery-wise, basically opening the window and seeing what is happening outside. And, well, there is nothing that really catches your eye. We have a front here off the East Coast, and that has brought quite a bit of dreary weather, or it's associated with a weather system that's brought quite a bit of dreary weather to the Northeast today. Lots of heavy rainfall and flash flooding in many spots, although at least I will tell you right now in New York City, it's kind of clearing out now, so the rest of the day is shaping up to be not as bad as how it started, but definitely a weather system moving by, and also bringing some shower and thunderstorm activity here to the southeast coast and Florida. But back out to the east here across the tropics, not much of any shower and thunderstorm activity to speak of, especially through the Caribbean here. Things are very, very dry right now. And especially extending through the MDR here, there is barely any speck of convection in sight. And on the other hand, look at this massive plume of Saharan air, which is coming off the coast of Africa. And yes, I know it is August now, but we are still early in the month, so we still get a lot of these massive Saharan air plumes to come off the coast of Africa. And clearly, there is one making its way off right now, and there's also a pretty nice aggressive tropical wave too in the eastern Atlantic, but I'm pretty sure as it moves off to the west here, it's probably going to get choked off by the Saharan air, and you could actually see it. Let's look at a graph specifically made for Saharan air, and I mean just look at the entire deep tropics here. No wonder why there is not a speck of convection in sight across the MDR right now. Very, very bone dry, and more than likely It's going to stay that way for a while, just given how much Saharan air is across the deep tropics right now, and also the big plume here that is still just coming off the coast of Africa. So at least keeping a lid on the deep tropics for now. And of course, this too, more than likely being influenced and helped by the strong El Nino that we have, record-setting strong El Nino that we have in the Pacific right now, which also is exerting its influence on the Atlantic as well. Here's another map that I want to show you, and this is one that I don't show you often, but it is a pretty interesting graph here. This is the total precipitable water content in the atmosphere, and this I think it's best described in the name, total precipitable water. And I want to show you this for two reasons. One, to show you in general the overall dryness that we have throughout the deep tropics right now, but two, to also show you that the whole point of these tropical waves, and one of the big features of these tropical waves is the fact that it has water content with it. And you could actually see, very interestingly enough, on this graph, on this map here, I should say, the outline of when tropical waves are moving off the coast of Africa. It's actually kind of neat. And you could definitely see that there is a pretty beefy wave moving off the coast of Africa now, but this map also shows you the very, very dry plume here over northern Africa, obviously associated with Saharan air. And you could also see the precipitable water, too, associated with whatever weather system here we have throughout the Northeast, with its water content kind of stretched out along the front here throughout the entire East Coast. So very, very neat map. And in a way, it also shows you just how fluid the atmosphere is. You may not think of it like that, but yeah, the atmosphere is fluid. It's ebbing and flowing, and it's changing constantly. And this map, I think, does a very good job at showing you that. Moving further to the east, though, actually looking at how things are looking like over Africa right now, because this is the motherland. Well, in multiple ways, it's the motherland, but it's the motherland of tropics tracking, because this is where all of our tropical waves originate off of. And you can see that very aggressive tropical wave moving off the coast of Africa here in the eastern Atlantic definitely has a decent bit of juice to it, as I showed you with the initial satellite picture and the precipitable water animation here. But again, very likely it's just going to move on off to the west and kind of fizzle away due to the very dry air that we have just to the north of it, which will eventually catch up to it at some point in the MDR. And then beyond that, east of that, throughout Africa, it looks like there are a few more, pockets of energy here waiting to come off the coast. Maybe there's another wave here just to the east of it, following right behind it. And then you could also see the beginnings of other tropical waves getting ready to launch and make their way westward. But overall, nothing too menacing. And you could say this is, again, all part of the pattern with the El Nino this year. In general, in El Ninos, the atmospheric influence that is needed to really help juice up the African monsoon, which is, generally what the rains here and the tropical waves come from in Africa, is the African monsoon, especially the West African monsoon. And I think we, talk about that term sometimes, especially in very active years when we have a very strong African monsoon, because that usually leads to lots of tropical waves, and especially lots of strong ones too, which is what then helps produce lots of activity in the Atlantic, tropical activity-wise, in terms of tropical storms and hurricanes, and you get the point. But in an El Nino year, we typically don't see that forcing with, a ample standing wave set up over Africa. Usually that is set up in the Pacific, and instead over Africa and the Indian Ocean and in the Atlantic, we have sinking air in the atmosphere, and you can kind of see that effect on Africa right now, although there are still some decent pieces of energy here, and eventually they will slide to the westward and make it into the tropical Atlantic, where we can then look at it using the vorticity map. Nice how I'm kind of moving through all the graphs here today, right? And besides the fact that the waves that move off the coast of Africa bring with them, energy in terms of water and with that, thunderstorms. But we could also detect them as well using the vorticity map too, because they usually have spin in them. They kind of have a kink to them in the atmosphere, which is what kind of gives them, which is why we kind of refer to tropical waves as seeds, which then grow and blossom into tropical cyclones. And you can see across the deep tropics right now, not really anything vorticity-wise that stands out to us. So that tells us that the tropical waves we have right now in the Atlantic are there, and there are definitely some pieces of energy here scattered throughout the deep tropics, but nothing is particularly strong. Especially because typically when you're looking at a strengthening storm on the vorticity map here, you typically look for something that is much more concentrated. You have much stronger vorticity values, and we have a very circular shape, and everything throughout the deep tropics here is very weak, very strung out, very elongated, and definitely tells us that there's really nothing bubbling in the atmosphere at this current time. Wind shear wise across the tropical Atlantic as well, also very much tells us that we are in an El Nino year. Take a look at the Caribbean first of all. Very, very strong wind shear, and I think this is pretty much the classic textbook of a sign that we are in an El Nino this year. 50 knots of wind shear ripping through the Caribbean right now, and boy, this is definitely not going to help aid in any sort of tropical development at all, which is definitely a good thing. And remember when I showed you the satellite picture earlier, there really was nothing to speak of, throughout the Caribbean as well. Just dry air and shear and Saharan air, just factor on top of factor, stacking on each other, really keeping a lid on things in the tropics and the Atlantic right now. And there are some, pockets of lower wind shear as we go further east into the MDR here, but there really does kind of seem to be this sort of wall of wind shear which extends through the Caribbean and especially eastward into the MDR, and especially just northward of the MDR. And so even if we sometimes do have aggressive, strong tropical waves which move off the coast of Africa, number one, they're going to get pummeled by the Saharan air, which is especially prevalent and very strong right now, given that it's still somewhat early in the season. So, maybe as we get later on in the season and we generally start seeing the Saharan air calm down, maybe that factor will go away. But it's the combination of just dealing with Saharan air, and then you have this wall of wind shear. Eventually, as this gets further west, that's just causing all of our pieces of energy here throughout the tropics to just fizzle out. And, that's keeping things shut down right now in the Atlantic basin. But you also do see, on the other hand, some pockets of wind shear, especially further to the west throughout the southwestern Atlantic, and especially right now in the Gulf. Some pockets of lower wind shear. So maybe that is where we will have to that's where we will have to watch and rely on to see, any leftovers of tropical waves here in the eastern MDR. Can they make it to these more favorable pockets of shear further west and eventually sprout and develop after all? And we've definitely seen that happen in past years, where even when we don't have pieces of energy that are able to develop further east, they make it ride it out, brave through all the unfavorable conditions, and eventually find more favorable conditions further west, and are eventually able to sprout. But nothing as of yet is looking like that is really happening. And for now, all of the wind shear and all of the dry air that we have throughout the tropics is keeping things quiet. But the question is, will that last? Are things going to continue to remain quiet, or is climatology actually going to start, catching up to conditions in the Atlantic? And I've talked about this before, and we've looked at this model for the past few days, but ever since last week, the models here, especially the long-range ensembles, are seemingly showing like there will be some signal to come in the MDR, and maybe one here off the southeast coast as well. In general, there are multiple signals here that we need to watch over the next 2 weeks as we progress further into August. And there's one signal here off the southeast coast, and this one is kind of on and off. But what I'm especially interested in, a lot of ensembles here showing quite a decent amount of activity in the MDR. And as I mentioned before, as we get into August, climatology generally tends to favor the eastern MDR more in terms of things getting more active as we are now approaching the peak of hurricane season. And so maybe this is a sign that, things are shut down for now, but in just a few weeks, the Atlantic will actually try to come to life and maybe fight back for a little bit against the unfavorable conditions, especially the unfavorable background state that we generally have due to the very strong El Nino that is in place. And still today, after several days in a row now, we still see the ensembles trying to spin something up here in the MDR, and you even have a few ensembles, honestly, that try to bring this further to the west, and especially some that recurve this to the north and then try to sprout something in the subtropics. And that honestly would especially shock me, given the general pattern we have this year of the deep tropics generally likely going to be unfavorable, but maybe as this gets further north in the subtropics and we get away from the influence of the strong shear due to the El Nino, maybe something will be able to sprout. So definitely interesting that we are still seeing these signals right now, at least on the long-range ensembles. But what about the actual operational models like the GFS? Well, let's take a look at it. This is the 12Z run of the GFS today for August 3rd, and it's mostly run except for the last frame here out to 384 hours out, but I think we would probably get almost a just as good picture without the last frame here, so let's run it anyways. And you can see here throughout the next 7 days, looks like the GFS is saying no, it doesn't really agree with the ensembles here. Trying to show something off the southeast coast, and if we take it out to the next 2 weeks, doesn't really try to show anything spin up in the MDR as well. It occasionally shows a strong wave here moving off of Africa and into the MDR, but it looks like it estimates or it believes that whatever dry air or shear that'll be awaiting for it in the MDR and in the tropical Atlantic will more than likely win out, and nothing just really comes to life. So, for now, these signals here that are on the ensembles and, whatever signals that might be appearing on whatever model you're looking at is, for now, just noise, unless all of the other models really start picking up. Nothing really solid is popping up, at least within the next 7 days. Maybe you can see that there's a piece of energy here off the southeast coast, and a few runs ago, the GFS was actually trying to develop something here off the Carolinas, and there's still a decent amount of energy here that is, noticeable enough that you can still see it on the Vorticity signature here, and there's a little bit of a kink to it, but more than likely this may not be more than just some showers and thunderstorms, which could still, bring impacts. It's not like showers and thunderstorms are something to completely take lightly, as they could, mess with your plans in a day. But in terms of any tropical development, nothing is really standing out just yet here on the GFS. And I think as long as that is the case, I'd say for now there's nothing too particularly worrying to look out for, or particularly worrying to talk about, that you must be paying close attention to, because it is an imminent threat. Obviously, we will be watching and seeing whether or not that can change, and especially with these quick spin-ups here, especially if we're talking about something kind of coming from non-tropical origin off the East Coast. Sometimes that does result in quick spin-ups that the models are not really able to properly latch onto until, sometimes maybe as little as 1 to 2 days out before we actually see development and a storm form. So maybe that might happen here within the next week. Again, you never really know, because we are heading into August now. We are getting closer towards the peak of the hurricane season. August 20th is the the first day of when we truly see the climatological ramp up, which then leads to the peak of the hurricane season. So we're only 17 days away from that. So just over 2 weeks right now. So when I'm trying to say bottom line, we are not far from the peak of the hurricane season. So you just got to pay attention to everything. So we will be watching these signals that the models show. And you can't entirely discard them, but right now what I'm saying is, looking at the models and, seeing these ensembles here versus the operational, and seeing the disagreement right now with nothing solid showing up, it's just hard to actually believe anything concrete and, hype it up and say that something will happen for sure, or there's something that's very likely to happen just yet, if you know what I mean. But regardless, we will be watching the tropics here closely over the next few weeks to see whether or not something does indeed actually happen. And then really quickly, let's look at the Eastern Pacific as well. And nothing much happens in the Eastern Pacific either. They're slipping into a slumber too, and I've mentioned that for a few days now. We might have a few pieces of energy here that try to spin up, and then maybe there's one piece here that is roughly around 7 to 8 days out that tries to develop here on the GFS, but nothing particularly strong showing up in the Eastern Pacific as well. So again, both basins in the Western Hemisphere remaining nice and quiet. And why is that? Why are we not seeing a lot of activity in either the Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic? Well, at least in the Atlantic aspect, I told you, dry air and shear and all of that, keeping a nice cap on things right now. But it also has to do with our friend, the MJO. Probably one of the largest, subseasonal factors that we look at when it comes to especially looking at long range, seeing when we will have favorable windows of opportunity for development. And this is one of the things that El Nino very clearly impacts. You could very clearly see the influence of El Nino with the MJO, because right now, over the next 2 weeks at least, at least this is the GFS forecast for the MJO, which takes us out to mid-August here, or just after August 17th. And you can see the MJO generally stays in the Western Pacific and even slips into the maritime continent a little bit, but advances pretty strongly into the Western Pacific as we head into August. And, the Western Pacific is definitely very far away from the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic. So the MJO is not in either of the basins right now, and certainly the Western Pacific will have quite a bit of activity to come in the next few weeks, and we'll talk about that more in the coming days, and I've already mentioned that before as well. But I think it's very expected given the pattern that we have this year. After all, we have a record strong El Nino, but one of the clearest cut signals of favorability, and one of the biggest factors when it comes to especially getting tropical development, the MJO. Not in either the Pacific, the Eastern Pacific, or the Atlantic right now. So because of that, it is no wonder why things are quiet for now. And of course, once again, why do we have this kind of MJO pattern, which, is especially kind of very stuck here in the Pacific? And if you also look at the MJO here, in the past, that's what this black line represents. It has definitely been, over the last several weeks, very, very focused throughout the Pacific. And even, as we got into phase 8 here, instead of actually progressing, into phase 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, which is the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, instead, we actually went null and went back, and we're now going back to the Pacific, and that too is a clear-cut sign of El Nino. See right there the major impact that El Nino has on the weather pattern. And that is generally what is driving a lot of things right now. This massive El Nino here in the Pacific. Just take a look at how warm the sea surface temperature anomalies are along the equatorial Pacific, and it is incredible. Widespread anomalies here, 2, 3 degrees Celsius, and you're even starting to see some anomalies here in the Eastern Pacific get as warm as 4 to even 5 degrees Celsius above normal, which is just off the charts insane. And it absolutely is setting the stage for a record-breaking event. It's already record-breaking. We are already pulling ahead in the daily records, sea surface temperature anomaly-wise, ahead of years like 1997, 2015, all of those very strong El Nino years. We are pulling ahead of all of them right now. and it is still August. El Nino does not reach its peak until usually around November or December, so we still have a few weeks away of likely even more warming here to come in the Pacific, and that is very, very clearly seen by taking a look at the zonal wind anomalies here, which represents the westerly winds and the easterly winds in the atmosphere globally. But especially seeing it to show how strong the El Nino is going to get, and you can see very clearly in the coming weeks here, very, very strong westerly winds are being forecasted on top of already just coming off of the last few weeks here throughout the entire month of July, already having very, very strong westerly winds in the Pacific, which is what helped us get this El Nino to the point that we are at right now. And again, it is still August, and taking a look at the very, very strong westerly winds here that are being forecasted as we progress into the month of August here, more El Nino strengthening is only even more likely to happen. And you could also imagine as well that these westerly winds too are especially going to help trigger lots of tropical activity, especially in the Western Pacific, on top of the already multiple very strong storms we've had over the last few weeks. And it's not going to stop. Things are still just beginning here. Things are still just beginning to unfold and unpack in the Pacific, and eventually I'd imagine these westerly winds will probably spread further to the east here, and also help aid in making the rest of the Pacific, including the Eastern Pacific, more active as well. So, lots of very interesting things happening here in the tropics, especially related to this El Nino, and it's certainly a major factor into this year's hurricane season, and into why things are generally, for the most part, nice and quiet across the Atlantic. But as I want to warn you right now, do not expect that to last, even if this year will more than likely be a below normal hurricane season, which at this point it will be. There's no denying it. Something will still happen at some point. Almost all of the past years, at least going back to 2015, had at least one storm at some point in the season which came along and definitely caused some chaos. And I'd imagine at some point we will get that storm this year. So don't expect the tropics to completely remain quiet, even if things are more than likely going to be slightly below normal this year, or maybe even more than that, given how strong this El Nino is getting. But something is still going to happen, and we are getting closer and closer towards the peak of the hurricane season after all. So you would expect at some point something to give, and for the Atlantic to produce a child of the tropics, or a monster, or just something. But for now, things are looking nice and quiet, although there are a few signals, and we will definitely continue to watch that here over the next few weeks. So make sure to stay tuned. And if you want to stay tuned to our daily updates here on the tropics, and you haven't already done so, I would really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel, especially if you are new here, because these updates, regardless of the fact that we have an El Nino and the Atlantic and the Pacific are quiet right now, we are still going to be doing these updates on a daily basis here on the tropics. So if you are interested in that, please make sure to subscribe and like the video. And again, if you decide to subscribe, which I hope you do, turn on the notification bell so you can get any video I upload the moment I upload it. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. That's going to do it for now. I'm Danilo Evangelista. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. And I will talk with all of you again tomorrow.